My name is Alina. My life ended in cold water and blinding jealousy. The last thing I saw was my sister Alara's face, twisted with a rage so profound it erased every memory of the girl I'd once known. Her hands shoved against my shoulders and the world tilted. The roar of the mountain stream swallowed my scream, and the icy water pulled me under. I thought of the scholarship, the investor by my side, the future I had clawed for, all the things she believed should have been hers. When I opened my eyes, I was 15 years younger. The familiar, damp smell of our cottage filled my nose. Sunlight, thin and weak, streamed through the single dusty window. I was in my bed, the straw mattress prickling through the thin sheet. For a moment I was disoriented, my mind still screaming from the cold water. Then I heard the voices from the main room. "Papa, you must listen," Alara's voice, high and sweet with false concern, carried through the thin wall. "Let Alina have this chance. The Kovac family is wealthy. Their son Miro is a good match. She'll be comfortable. Let me bear the hardship of studying." My blood ran colder than the mountain stream. I knew this script. I had lived it before. But last time the roles were reversed. She had taken the marriage to the village elder's son, and I had taken the rusty bicycle and the thin coat. Now she was reciting my old lines with theatrical perfection. I pushed off the rough blanket and stood on trembling legs. I walked to the cracked mirror propped on a crate. My own face, gaunt and young with eyes too old for it, stared back. The faint scar on my chin from a childhood fall was there. This was real. I had not just traveled back in time, I had been granted a brutal second chance. And Alara, by the cunning in her voice, was playing the same game. I understood instantly. In her first life, married to Miro Kovac, she had been miserable. She'd borne 3 daughters, been scorned by her mother-in-law, and watched from her gilded cage as I built a life of my own. She thought the education was the prize. She thought she was sentencing me to the prison she had escaped. A grim smile touched my lips. She had no idea what that marriage truly contained or who Miro Kovac really was. I entered the main room. My father, Gregor, stood looking down at Alara, who was kneeling dramatically at his feet, tears tracing clean paths down her otherwise dirty cheeks. Our stepmother, Anya, hovered behind him, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Ah, Alina, you're awake," Gregor said, his voice a mixture of relief and discomfort. "Your sister is being most selfless." Alara turned her tear-streaked face to me, her eyes gleaming with a triumph only I could see. "Sister," she whispered, her voice choked with false sacrifice. "Take this opportunity. Marry well. Be happy. I will manage with the books." In our first life, when she had offered me the marriage, I had jumped at it, seeing it as an escape from poverty and my stepmother's disdain. I had thought it kindness. Now I saw the trap she believed she was setting for me. I looked from her performative grief to my father's pitying face, and then to Anya's calculating stare. The saying echoed in my reborn mind. Where there's a stepmother, there's a stepfather. I had lived the truth of it. In my first life, when Alara agreed to the marriage, my father had opened his wallet to add to her dowry. Now he was reaching for it again to buy her a new bicycle for school. I was never in his calculations. I was the transaction, the inconvenience, the daughter from a ghost he'd rather forget, my mother. A profound chill settled in my bones, colder and more permanent than the stream's embrace. These people were not my family. They were strangers bound to me by a fleeting accident of blood. "Very well," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "If Alara wishes to study so fervently, let her. I will accept the Kovac family's proposal." The shock in the room was palpable. Alara's tears stopped instantly, replaced by a flash of unguarded victory. She had expected resistance, pleading. My quick compliance was a gift. Father looked relieved, the decision made. Anya's lips pursed, likely already counting the dowry money. Good, Gregor mumbled, pulling a few worn bills from his wallet. "For your dedication, Alara, a new bicycle. Alina, the Kovacs will provide." And just like that, my second life was set on its path. As they fussed over Alara, planning her journey to the county school, I felt nothing. The emotional ties that had once bound me here, the longing for a father's love, the hope for a sister's bond, had drowned in that stream. All that remained was a clear, cold purpose. In my first life I had learned a brutal lesson. Relying on anyone was a prelude to betrayal. This time I would rely only on myself. But first I had to walk into the gilded cage my sister so desperately feared, and see what tools I could find within its walls. The weeks passed in a blur of muted activity. The Kovac family, the most prominent in our village of Oakvale, sent betrothal gifts. My own preparations were pitiful. My entire life's belongings fit into one splintering wooden suitcase. A few threadbare dresses and my only treasure, a small silver locket. It was not ornate, just a simple, smooth oval on a thin chain. My mother had given it to me the winter before she died, her hands already too weak to fasten it around her own neck. "For longevity, my little fox," she'd whispered. I wore it always, a cool, secret weight against my skin. The morning of my wedding was also the day Elara left for the county high school. At dawn, my father borrowed a cousin's sputtering motorcycle to take her and Anya. He promised he would return in time to carry me to the wedding sedan as was the custom. "Sister," Elara said to me as she climbed onto the back of the bike, her suitcase, new and sturdy, strapped beside her. "Be sure to give the Kovacs a son quickly." Her smile was all venomous silk. I didn't answer. I simply watched as the motorcycle coughed to life and disappeared down the muddy path in a cloud of exhaust. The county was 30 kilometers away. A round trip would take 4, maybe 5 hours. I knew with absolute certainty that he would not return for me. I was alone. I finished packing the locket in my suitcase. I slipped into the red wedding gown the matchmaker had delivered. It was slightly too big, the embroidered phoenixes on the sleeves seeming to sag. I thought of Elara's fate in our first life. The initial pride, the gradual erosion, the bitterness. I thought of Miro Kovac. I knew so little of him. In my first life, our interaction had been a single brief moment years later, when he had quietly pressed an envelope into my hand at a village gathering. "Study hard," he'd said, his voice low and earnest. "Live well." I had been too surprised to thank him properly. Outside, the sound of drums and gongs swelled, shaking the quiet of our tiny yard. The wedding procession had arrived. "Bride's father, come carry out your daughter." The matchmaker's shrill cry pierced the air. She called 3 times. Only the chickens clucked in response. The murmurs of the gathered villagers grew from curiosity to pity. I could hear them. "No father to carry her. What happens when a man gets a new wife? The first children are forgotten. Poor girl. Poor girl." The words almost made me laugh. Pity was a currency for the weak. I had legs. I had a will. Why did I need to be carried like a sack of grain from one man's house to another's? I picked up my suitcase, smoothed the red veil over my face and walked out of the house on my own. My steps were slow, deliberate on the packed earth. The chatter died instantly. I could feel dozens of eyes on me through the red haze of the veil. Let them stare. Let them whisper. This walk, under my own power, was my first act of ownership in this new life. I was not being given away. I was leaving. I reached the ornate, canopied sedan chair where the Kovac men waited. A hand, large and slightly calloused, reached out to steady me as I stepped up. Through the veil I saw a glimpse of a formal jacket sleeve. "No. Thank you," I murmured. His hand tightened for a second, a brief, wordless acknowledgement before he let go. I settled into the chair. As the drums and gongs erupted again and the men lifted the poles, I took a deep breath. The phoenixes on my sleeves seemed to shift with the movement. The cage door was ahead. But this time I walked in with my eyes open, and my heart was not a vulnerable, hoping thing. It was a fortress under construction. The wedding sedan swayed rhythmically, a cocoon of red fabric in strange solitude. Through the gauzy veil, the world was a blur of green fields and curious faces. The drums were a distant throb, the gongs a sharp punctuation to the end of my old life. I held my suitcase on my lap, my fingers tight around the handle. It was all I had. The procession wound through Oakvale, past the familiar leaning cottages, past the communal well, finally stopping before the only 2-story house in the village. The Kovac home. It was whitewashed stone with a slate roof, solid and imposing amidst the thatch and timber. A symbol of power. The sedan was lowered. The curtain was pulled back and the same large hand appeared. I took it, letting Miro Kovac help me down. My legs were stiff. Through the veil I could make out his shape, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that looked uncomfortably formal. He led me through a gate into a courtyard where people milled about, their voices a buzzing hum of congratulations and curiosity. The ceremony was a familiar blur. Bows to the ancestral altar in the main room, which smelled of incense and old wood. A quick, almost shy exchange of cups of wine with Moreau. His fingers brushed mine and I felt him startle slightly at the contact. Then we were ushered into a banquet where I sat like a decorated doll at the head table, food placed before me that I didn't touch. The red veil was a barrier, a welcome screen between me and the staring eyes. Through it I studied my new family. Lazar Kovac, the village elder, was a stern-faced man with a neat beard, holding court with other important men. His wife Katerina was a different story. She moved through the guests with a sharp smile, her eyes missing no detail. A dropped napkin, an empty cup, a child getting too loud. She was the true engine of this household. Her gaze swept over me often, assessing, calculating the value of this new acquisition. Night fell and the guests eventually trickled away, leaving a mess of empty plates and cups. Finally, I was led upstairs to the bridal chamber. It was not what I expected. While the downstairs was traditional, heavy with dark wood and woven rugs, this room was different. The walls were painted a soft cream. There was a large bed with a real mattress, a sturdy wardrobe and even a small writing desk by the window. A modern oil lamp cast a warm glow. It was clean, elegant, almost citified. This was Katerina's domain, I realized. A show of their modernity and wealth. Moreau and I were left alone. We sat side by side on the edge of the bed, a careful foot of space between us. The silence was thick, strained. I could hear his steady breathing, slightly quicker than normal. He was more nervous than I was. In my first life, Elara had described him as weak, useless, a spineless man she could dominate. The man sitting beside me, holding himself so still he might break, didn't fit that description. He seemed paralyzed by circumstance. Taking a chance, I shifted slightly closer. The bed frame creaked. He stiffened. "We are strangers," I said, my voice quiet in the hushed room. "Perhaps we should get to know each other first. The rest can follow in its own time." There was a long pause. Then a slow, almost relieved exhale. "Yes," he said, the single word deep and gravelly from disuse. "That would be good." A fraction of my tension eased. He was not a brute. "Then," I said, reaching for his hand where it rested on his knee. "Will you lift my veil? All I can see is red." His hand turned under mine, his fingers surprisingly gentle as they found the edge of the heavy fabric. He lifted it, carefully folding it back over my head. The first thing I saw was his face, now flushed a deep ruddy red all the way to the tips of his ears. He had kind eyes, a dark, earnest brown, currently wide with anxiety. His features were strong, a square jaw, a straight nose, but softened by the undeniable vulnerability in his expression. He looked at me, really looked, and then quickly glanced away as if the sight burned him. Before either of us could muster another word, the peace was shattered by the violent sputter of a motorcycle engine right outside the window. It roared, died, then roared again. My father's borrowed motorcycle. I glanced at the small digital clock on the bedside table. It was past 8. Downstairs I heard movement, Katerina's sharp voice questioning. The engine had woken the house. Minutes later, heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. My father, Gregor, burst into the room without knocking, Anya on his heels. His eyes were dramatic, searching for me. "Alina, my daughter," he cried, rushing forward to grab my hands. His palms were damp. "You are married now. A father's heart is breaking. Sending a daughter away is like pouring out a bowl of water. It can never be retrieved." It was a performance. A poor one. Moreau stood up awkwardly, looking from me to my father. "Mr. Veselin, Alina is welcome here. She can visit whenever she wishes." No, Gregor waved a hand, squeezing my fingers painfully. "She's part of your family now. A married woman shouldn't run back too often." His eyes darted around the nice room, taking in its quality. Anya swooped in, her voice syrupy. "Alina, your father drove for 3 hours in the dark just to see you off properly." 3 hours? The lie was breathtaking. They had been in the county with Elara. The trip from our house to this one was 15 minutes. I saw it then, the little play. They had come for the formalities, to secure their position as in-laws, and most importantly for the red envelope gift the groom's family traditionally gave the bride's parents on the wedding night. They hadn't received it earlier because my father hadn't been here to perform the sending-off ritual. The chill inside me hardened into ice. I extracted my hands from my father's grip and smiled, a cool, polite curve of my lips. You are too kind, Papa. But we are all family now. I turned to where Lazar and Katerina had appeared in the doorway, woken by the commotion. I walked over and gently took Katerina's arm. Is that not right, Mother? The word hung in the air. Katerina's eyes narrowed, but she gave a short, tight nod. Of course. Family is family. Gregor and Anya floundered, their script disrupted. The expected emotional payoff wasn't happening. Katerina, never one to suffer fools, cut to the chase. Since we are speaking of family formalities, she said, her voice like polished steel. When will the dowry be returned? The dowry. A sum from the groom's family to the bride's, part of which was traditionally given back to the new couple to start their life. In our case, knowing my father, he had likely pocketed all of it for Alara's new life. My father's face went slack. The dowry? It is not with you. Katerina's voice could have frozen the stream that killed me. I saw the panic in Anya's eyes. I decided to twist the knife gently. I looked at Moreau, forcing a playful tone. Husband, you see, you must learn these customs. You haven't even called them father and mother yet. And they haven't given you their wedding gift. The trap was sprung. Under the expectant gaze of my new in-laws and the lingering neighbors who had been drawn by the noise, my father had no choice. His face ashen, he pulled a worn leather wallet from his pocket and counted out 200 yuan, his hands trembling. It was a pitiful sum, an insult. Anya looked like she might be sick. Katerina took the money with a sniff, not even counting it. The dowry. 1 week, she stated, leaving no room for argument. Muttering excuses, my father and Anya fled, their grand performance ending in humiliating retreat. As their motorcycle sputtered away into the night, a strange quiet descended. Katerina looked at me, then at the money in her hand, and finally at Moreau. Get some rest, she said shortly, and left, pulling Lazar with her. We were alone again. The silence now was different, charged not with awkwardness but with the aftermath of a skirmish. Moreau finally spoke, staring at the floor. I am sorry. That was unpleasant. It was the truth, I said simply. And truth is rarely pleasant. I began taking the heavy pins from my hair. Tomorrow I will rise early. I did. Before the first rooster crowed, I was awake. I dressed in a simple, sturdy dress from my suitcase, braided my hair and went downstairs. The house was silent, but the aftermath of the wedding feast was a disaster zone in the main room and courtyard. I had to work. I gathered plates and cups, scrubbing them in the cold pump water at the sink. I swept the floors, first downstairs then upstairs, careful and thorough. I gathered the leftover food, some good meat and vegetables, and began preparing a breakfast. Congee, steamed buns, pickles and fried eggs. I was setting the table when Katerina appeared. She was already dressed, her hair perfectly coiled. She watched me, her arms crossed, saying nothing until I placed the last dish. Do you work this hard in your father's house? She asked, her tone unreadable. A woman who does not work does not eat, I replied, quoting an old village saying. It was true in my case. Survival had depended on labor. She hummed, a non-committal sound. She walked to the table, inspected the food, then finally sat. Moreau and Lazar came down, drawn by the smell. They sat, but I remained standing, waiting for Katerina to begin. Sit, she said, not looking at me. We are not feudal lords. I sat. The meal was eaten in near silence. When we were done, Katerina wiped her mouth neatly. You have quick hands. Not like the pampered girl the village whispers about. Perhaps this marriage was not a mistake. She stood, went to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room and opened it. From inside she pulled out several thick bundles of cash. My dowry. My heart beat faster. Capital. My first real chance. She counted out 8 bundles of 10,000 each. 80,000. A fortune. Then to my surprise she split one bundle in half. 20,000 will go back to your parents as is customary. 5,000 is for you. She pushed the stack of 5 bills toward me. She held the remaining 55,000. I will keep this safe. 5,000. It was a seed, but a small one. Disappointment was a bitter taste, but I swallowed it. I had to be smart. Thank you, Mother, I said, my voice soft. Her hand, reaching for her teacup, paused. She didn't look at me, but her shoulders lost a fraction of their rigidness. Humph. Don't work yourself to the bone. People will say I am a tyrant. After she left for her morning rounds, Moreau lingered. He saw me looking at the money, my mind racing. I have some savings, he said abruptly, his voice low. From odd jobs. I'll lend you 5,000. You can pay it back. He didn't ask what I needed it for. He simply went to our room and returned with another stack of bills, placing it beside mine. 10,000 total. I looked up at him, this stranger who was now my husband. His kindness was quiet, unassuming. It was nothing like Alara's stories. Thank you, I said, and this time I meant it. I thought today, since it is our first day, he stumbled over the words, his ears turning pink again. I could take you to the county town. On the motorcycle. If you like. A trip. An escape, however brief, from the village and its watching eyes. A chance to plan. I felt the first genuine flicker of something besides cold determination. I would like that, I said. And for the first time I smiled at him, a real one. He stared for a second, then looked away, but not before I saw a shy, answering smile touch his own lips. The cage had a door. And perhaps, just perhaps, the keeper was not a jailer, but a fellow occupant who also didn't know the way out. We would have to find it together. The motorcycle was an old, rumbling beast, but Moreau handled it with a steady, confident ease that surprised me. As we left the confines of Oakvale, the wind pulling at my braid and the sun warming my face, I felt a physical loosening of the knots inside me. The world opened up, endless stretches of green paddies giving way to rolling hills, the air smelling of damp earth and freedom. Our first stop in the bustling county town was, at my request, a bookstore. It was a small, dusty place, crammed floor to ceiling with volumes. Moreau waited by the door, a silent, solid presence, while I browsed. I bypassed the popular novels and went straight to the neglected section in the back. Agricultural science, soil management, greenhouse cultivation techniques. In my first life, my degree had been theoretical. Now I needed practical knowledge. I selected 3 of the most detailed texts, along with a sturdy notebook and a pack of pens. As we approached the cashier, a familiar, grating laugh froze my steps. There, by a rack of garish romance novels, stood Alara. She was clinging to the arm of a young man in a cheap leather jacket, her head tilted in a way meant to be charming. The book in her hand was titled The Passionate Affair. It was a school day. She should have been in a classroom, not here playing at being a sophisticated town girl. She saw me. A flash of pure panic crossed her face, quickly smothered by a smug superiority as her eyes took in Moreau, standing behind me in his simple, clean work clothes. Compared to her slick companion, Moreau looked exactly like what he was, a honest village man. She sauntered over, her new school shoes clicking on the linoleum. Alina. What a surprise. Her voice was saccharine. Buying books. How studious. Shouldn't you be home tending to the pigs? Oh, wait, she feigned a gasp, her eyes sparkling with malice. You'll be busy tending to your own little piglets soon, won't you? Every cruel word was a mirror of her own miserable future, the one she thought she was escaping. In our first life after her wedding, she'd been given her dowry money too. Poisoned by our stepmother's whispers, she'd believed Katerina meant to steal it. In a fit of spite, she'd snuck into her in-laws' room and taken not just the dowry but Katerina's heirloom jewelry. The scandal had never left her. Her value had dwindled to her womb, and even that had failed her 3 times over. I felt no anger, only a cold, clear pity. Getting into university requires actual study, Alara, I said calmly. It's not something you can charm your way into. Her smirk faltered, then returned, sharper. What would you know? This, she preened, squeezing the leather jacket's arm, is Luca. His father is the district commerce director. She said the title as if it were a royal decree. I knew Luca. In my first life he'd been a scourge. He'd pursued me briefly, and when I'd publicly rejected his clumsy advances, he and his friends had made my school life a hell of tripped books, stolen lunches, and vulgar whispers. He was a spoiled, vicious boy hiding behind his father's title, a boy who left a trail of ruined girls in his wake. Luca's eyes, small and piggish, slid over me with an appraisal that made my skin crawl. She's cute, he said to Alara, his voice a lazy drawl. Rustic. I've never tried the innocent type before. A red haze of old fury clouded my vision for a second. Before I could speak, Elara, seeking to curry favor, raised her hand to slap me for the insult to her boyfriend. Her wrist never connected. Miro's hand shot out and caught it midair. He didn't shout. He simply held her, his grip firm, his face like stone. "It is wrong to hit people," he said, his voice low but carrying a finality that silenced the entire shop. In the shock of his intervention, I acted. I swung my own hand, putting the weight of 2 lifetimes of resentment into it. The sound echoed in the quiet store. Elara's head snapped to the side, a red imprint blooming on her cheek. She stared at me, utterly stunned. "Don't ever try that again," I said, my voice colder than the mountain stream. "Your fate is in your own hands, Elara. Not the heavens, and certainly not his." I glanced at the gawking Luca with pure contempt, then turned to the stunned cashier, paid for my books and walked out, Miro a step behind me. He didn't speak until we were back on the motorcycle. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tense. "I am better than all right," I said, and realized it was true. The act of defiance, of refusing to be her victim again, was a tonic. I looked at the books in my lap. "My weapons." "Thank you." He just nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. "He is a bad man. His father's reputation is not good." So Miro knew. He was quiet, not blind. We spent the rest of the day on practicalities. I used a small portion of our money to buy us both simple, well-made clothes. Durable trousers and cotton shirts, a practical dress for me. When Miro changed out of his stiff wedding suit, he seemed to transform, standing taller. He looked capable. "You didn't have to," he mumbled, touching the fabric of his new shirt. "It's your money," I said with a small smile. "Investing in the business." "The business?" he asked, confused but intrigued. "You'll see." Back in Oakvale, I devoured the agricultural books. Then I asked Miro to show me the Kovac lands. They were extensive, bordering the forest at the village edge. The soil was rich, dark loam, but underutilized. They grew cabbage, potatoes, some corn, subsistence crops sold cheaply in bulk. "What if," I said to Miro as we stood in the middle of a sun-drenched field, "we grew something they couldn't get in the county market? Something that needed care, not just space." He looked at the land, his gaze thoughtful. "The soil here is good. It could hold moisture for longer season plants. But the frost comes early. What if we didn't let it?" I asked, opening one of my books to a chapter on polyethylene greenhouses. I showed him diagrams of simple steel frames and plastic sheeting. "We control the environment. We can grow late tomatoes, cucumbers, strawberries." His eyes lit up. Strawberries. They were a luxury in the county, shipped from far away, often bruised and expensive. "The initial cost," he began, always practical. "We have 10,000, I said. "We start small. 1 greenhouse. We test the soil, we learn." He was silent for a long time, staring at the land as if seeing it for the first time. "I have some old piping in the barn," he said finally. "We could use it for the frame. Save on steel." That was the moment I knew I had an ally. Not just a husband, but a partner. He didn't just agree, he problem-solved. The next week was a whirlwind. We calculated, measured, and with a grudging advance from Katerina after seeing my detailed plans, I placed an order for a truckload of thick UV-resistant plastic sheeting. When it arrived, we hired a few village men looking for day work. Miro directed them with a quiet authority I hadn't seen before, showing them how to sink the posts, secure the piping frame. I worked alongside them, my hands getting dirty, blisters forming and breaking. I barely noticed. I was building something. Katerina would appear at the field's edge at mealtimes, wordlessly placing a covered basket of food and a flask of tea on a stone. No praise, no criticism. Just sustenance. The day we stretched the final sheet over the frame, securing our first greenhouse, I felt a surge of pride so profound it stole my breath. It glinted in the afternoon sun, a bubble of promise on the brown earth. And then I heard the car. A shiny, foreign sedan, absurdly out of place, bumped down the village track. It stopped by our field. The window rolled down, revealing Elara wearing oversized sunglasses. Our stepmother Anya was in the passenger seat, beaming like a lottery winner. "Alina. What a coincidence," Elara called, her voice dripping with false cheer. She took in my muddy clothes, the greenhouse, and her smile turned vicious. "Playing in the dirt? Don't you have pigs to feed? Oh, I forgot, you're the pig now, rolling in your own filth." The driver, a hulking man with a tattoo snaking down his neck, whistled. A greenhouse. Fancy. Seen that on TV. Makes real money. At the word money, Ilara's face hardened. Jealousy, pure and corrosive, twisted her features. Before I could process her movement, she lunged across the man, shoved him aside and slammed her foot on the accelerator. The car lurched forward with a roar. It wasn't an accident. It was a targeted, rage-filled act of destruction. The sedan tore through the side of our greenhouse. The sound was horrific, ripping plastic, shattering piping, the crunch of the wooden bed frames we'd already prepared inside. The car plowed through the length of it, spun in the mud and then sped away, leaving a trail of devastation. I stood frozen, clutching my shovel, watching a month of hope and labor lie in ruins. The gleaming plastic was now shredded trash. The careful frame was a mangled skeleton. The cold fire that had replaced my blood in this second life ignited into an inferno. She wasn't just jealous. She was pathological. She would rather destroy what I built than see me succeed. Without a word, I turned and began walking not toward home but toward my father's house. The shovel in my hand felt like an extension of my will. Moreau, his face a mask of shock and fury, fell into step beside me. We didn't speak. The rage between us was a living thing. We found them in the yard. Ilara was holding court, reclining on a chair while our father massaged her shoulders. You work so hard at school, he was cooing. The tattooed man lounged nearby, smoking. I didn't break stride. I walked right up to Ilara's chair. You were born lazy, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. The moment you got to school, you started chasing rich boys while I trudged through mud. You sell your pride for pocket money and call it luck. The tattooed man jumped up. Who the hell do you think you're talking to? He grabbed a wooden stool, lifting it to threaten me. Anya chose that moment to collapse to the ground in a theatrical wail. Violence. They've come to murder us. The commotion brought neighbors running. My father flapped his hands helplessly. Please, Alina, she's your sister. Ilara, shielded by her thuggish boyfriend, sneered. My boyfriend is the district director's son. Touch me and you'll rot in jail. I looked at her, at the smug triumph in her eyes, and I saw the ghost of the woman who pushed me into a stream. The woman who believed privilege was a weapon she alone deserved to wield. I hefted the shovel. But I never got to swing it. A shadow fell over the yard. A large cast-iron washing basin, wielded like a mythical weapon, descended from on high and connected with the tattooed man's head with a resonant gong. He dropped like a sack of stones. I turned. There, standing like an avenging goddess, was Katerina Kovac. Behind her were Lazar and 3 other Kovac cousins, faces set in grim lines. You think a driver's son is a district director? Katerina spat, advancing on the cowering Ilara. She brought the basin down again, not on Ilara but on the groaning tattooed man's back. Whack. You bring this trash to my village? To destroy my family's work. Ilara screamed, scrambling backward. Call your father. Have them arrested. The tattooed man, holding his bleeding head, whimpered. Shut up, you idiot. I'm the director's driver's son. You said this was just a scare. The lie unraveled in the public square. As they turned on each other, clawing and shrieking, the sound of a real official car engine approached. Not a sedan but a black SUV with government plates. A man in a crisp suit stepped out. He had an air of quiet, unimpeachable authority. The district director himself. He took in the scene. The wailing Anya, the brawling couple, my father's ashen face, me and Moreau standing with tools in hand, and Katerina, still holding her iron basin, breathing fire. What is the meaning of this? His voice cut through the chaos. Katerina didn't curtsy or flatter. She pointed a blunt finger at Ilara and the tattooed man. These 2 destroyed private property and caused a public disturbance. And this one, she jabbed the finger at my father, harbors them. The director's gaze swept over them, then landed on me. Something in my expression, the fury, the defiance, the utter lack of fear, seemed to give him pause. He looked at the ruined greenhouse visible in the distance, then back at the perpetrators. Take them to the station, he ordered the officers who had followed him. As they dragged a shrieking Ilara and the sobbing tattooed man away, my father and stepmother were also escorted, stammering protests. The director then turned to Katerina, and his stern expression softened by a fraction. Aunt Katerina, I see you still don't tolerate fools. Aunt, The revelation hung in the air. Katerina gave a tight, dignified nod. They damaged your cousin Miro's new business venture. The greenhouse. The director, my husband's cousin, looked at Miro then at me with new interest. Is that so? I've been reviewing the new rural entrepreneurship subsidy applications. A certain Veselin Kovac greenhouse project just crossed my desk. He glanced at the destruction. I trust this setback won't deter you? The world tilted on its axis. The cage I thought I was in had a back door I never knew existed, and it opened into corridors of real power. I looked from the director's expectant face to Katerina's proud, defiant one, to Miro's steady, supportive gaze. No, sir, I said, my voice clear and strong over the wreckage. It only makes me more determined. We will rebuild. And for the first time I truly believed we would. Not just the greenhouse. Everything. The silence after the government SUV drove away was profound. The gathered villagers stared, first at the departing vehicle, then at us, at Katerina standing like a general after a battle, and at me, the new daughter-in-law who had somehow summoned the district director. Whispers began, a rustling like dry leaves. Katerina ignored them. She handed the dented washing basin to a stunned cousin and brushed her hands together. Come, she said to me and Miro, her tone brooking no argument. We have plans to make. Back in the Kovac house, the atmosphere had shifted. The stern matriarch was still there, but the edge of perpetual disapproval was gone, replaced by a focused, calculating energy. The director, whose name was Stefan, sat in our main room, sipping the tea I hastily prepared. The subsidy is approved, Stefan said, placing his cup neatly on the saucer. 10,000 yuan for innovative agricultural projects. The paperwork was fast-tracked. He gave a small, dry smile. My aunt's recommendations are persuasive. Katerina didn't smile back, but her eyes glinted. It is a good project. Not just digging holes. It's thinking. Stefan nodded, turning to me. Miss Alina, or perhaps Cousin Alina now. The proposal was yours. Yes, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. The land is good, but the seasons are short. The greenhouse extends our growing window. We aim for high-value produce, organic vegetables, strawberries for the county restaurants, not the bulk market. He listened, his head tilted. Organic. A city trend, but a growing one. You have buyers. Not yet. The first harvest will be my proof. Good. Don't put the cart before the horse. He stood, straightening his jacket. The subsidy funds will be transferred next week. And, he added, his gaze hardening slightly, the matter of the vandalism. A civil suit for damages is your right. The court will be receptive. After he left, the weight of his words settled in the room. We had not just permission to rebuild, we had backing. And we had justice within our grasp. Katerina waited until the sound of his car faded. Then she walked to the same locked cabinet. This time she pulled out not just my dowry but a larger separate bundle. She placed both on the table. 80,000 returned as it should be. And 20,000 from me. She pushed the staggering sum of 100,000 yuan toward me. For the business. You are the manager. Miro is the land. I am the bank. We do not speak of this to fools. I was speechless. This wasn't just capital, it was trust. A partnership. Thank you, mother, I said, the title feeling real for the first time. Humph. Just see that it grows. But her hand as she poured more tea was steady, and she poured a cup for me too. The next weeks were a blur of furious activity. With the combined subsidy and Katerina's investment, we didn't just rebuild one greenhouse. We built two, larger and sturdier, with proper ventilation and irrigation lines Miro designed himself. He moved a small cot into a tool shed at the edge of the field, standing guard at night. The memory of the destruction was a raw wound for us both. While the physical structure rose again, I went to court. The trial was a quiet, procedural affair. My father, Gregor, was there representing Alara, still a minor, and himself. When the judge asked for my account, I gave it plainly. The deliberate drive through the greenhouse, the calculated destruction. Gregor exploded. She is your sister, he shouted, his face purpling as he pointed a shaking finger at me. You heartless girl. You are jealous. Jealous she is smart, jealous she went to school. You want to drag her down into the mud with you. I sat in the witness stand watching him. The man who had forgotten to carry me to my wedding, who had driven hours for Alara's comfort but could not spare 15 minutes for my farewell. The man whose wallet only opened for his second family. His rage was a spectacle, but it touched nothing inside me. The well of longing for a father's love had run dry a lifetime ago. Your Honor, I said calmly, cutting through his tirade. The evidence is the destroyed property. My motivation is irrelevant. The law exists to protect citizens from damage, regardless of family ties. The judgment was swift. The tattooed man, whose name was Boris, was fined and given community service. Alara, as a minor, was ordered to pay restitution for the damages, a sum to be deducted from any future inheritance or earnings, and placed under a form of house arrest and mandatory counseling. My father and Anya were reprimanded for negligence. We left the courthouse with a legal victory but a deeper, personal schism. My father didn't look at me. He walked away with Anya, their backs stiff with defeat and fury. I walked away with Miro and Katerina, our unity forged stronger in the fire of their hate. With the greenhouses complete, I turned to the next battle, the market. I learned to ride Miro's motorcycle, the wind in my face a constant companion as I traveled to the county town. I wasn't just a farmer. I was a saleswoman. I took samples of our first harvest, crisp lettuce, radiant cherry tomatoes, herbs that smelled of summer, to the back doors of restaurants. The rejections were many. Too expensive. We have a supplier. Local produce is irregular. I persisted. I tailored my pitch. For a high-end bistro, I emphasized the organic nature, the story of family land, the freshness measured in hours, not days. For a larger inn, I talked about reliability and supporting local innovation. I secured 2 contracts, one with The Vineyard, a chic restaurant, and another with the Oak Inn, a respected establishment. They were not the biggest, but they were a start. The money from those first deliveries was a trickle, then a stream. I plowed every yuan back into the operation. Better seeds, finer irrigation, a small composting system. Katerina managed the household accounts with terrifying efficiency, but the farm ledger was mine. She inspected it weekly, asking sharp questions, but her nods grew more frequent. My reputation in the village began to change. I was no longer just the Veselin girl who married the Kovac boy, or the one whose sister went mad and destroyed her greenhouse. I was the Kovac daughter-in-law with the greenhouses, or simply, Alina from the farm. The true turning point came when I decided to target the Imperial Garden, the most prestigious restaurant in the entire prefecture, located in the city an hour's drive away. Landing them would be a seal of quality that would open every other door. I dressed carefully in the one good suit I'd bought, a tailored jacket and trousers, city clothes. I drove our newly purchased second-hand van, loaded with perfect, glistening produce. I was nervous, but it was a clean, sharp nervousness, not the fear of my old life. At the Imperial Garden, I asked to speak to the owner, a Mr. Chin. The maitre d', sniffing at my van, told me to wait. I decided to have lunch at the bar to observe the service, the clientele. And there, in a booth of opulent discomfort, was my past gorging itself. Alara, Anya, and Gregor were seated with a man in his 40s, his hair slicked back, his fingers heavy with gold rings. Alara's belly was visibly rounded under her tight dress. She was pregnant. She hung on the man's arm, laughing too loudly, her eyes darting around to see who noticed her. My appetite vanished. I was about to leave when Alara spotted me. Her gaze swept over my suit, my solitary table, and her expression cycled from shock to fury to a smug, possessive glee. She whispered to the man, "Mr. Jiao," I heard her call him, and pointed at me. He looked over, his eyes lingering with a bored appraisal. Mr. Chin, the owner, chose that moment to approach my table. He was a slender, elegant man in his 50s. "Miss Kovac?" he asked, extending a hand. I stood shaking it. "Mr. Chin. Thank you for seeing me." Behind me I heard Alara's chair scrape. She wobbled over on high heels, a glass of red wine in her hand. "Well, look who's in the city," she purred, her voice carrying. "Digging in the dirt must pay better than I thought. Or did your husband's family buy you that suit?" Mr. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. "My business with Mr. Chen is private, Alara," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "My business is with Mr. Jiao," she shot back, inflating with self-importance. "I'm the future Mrs. Jiao. This," she patted her belly, "is the Jiao heir." Something you'll never understand, being stuck with a village dullard. Her eyes glittered with malice. Some of us are just meant for better things. Her jealousy was a toxic cloud. I ignored her, turning back to Mr. Chin. Perhaps we could discuss the samples in your office? Of course, he said, his politeness a shield. Infuriated by my dismissal, Elara lurched forward as if to block my path. Her heel caught, or she pretended it did. The glass of red wine in her hand flew from her grasp, arcing through the air to splash across the front of my cream-colored jacket. A gasp went up from nearby tables. A deep, crimson stain spread over the fabric. Oh no! Elara cried, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with fake remorse. I'm so sorry. I'm so clumsy in my condition. Everyone was looking. Mr. Chin frowned, signaling a waiter for a cloth. The stain was set. My expensive suit, my professional armor, was ruined. I looked at the spreading red, then at Elara's poorly concealed smirk. A cold, clear certainty washed over me. She would always be this. She had been given a second chance just like me, and she had used it to chase the same hollow prizes, to settle for the same bitter resentments. She was a prisoner of her own small, vindictive heart. I felt no anger. Only a profound, weary pity. I took the cloth from the waiter and dabbed at the stain, knowing it was futile. It's just a thing, Elara, I said, my voice so quiet only she and Mr. Chin could hear. Some of us build things. Others can only break them. It must be a lonely way to live. Her smirk vanished, replaced by baffled fury. My indifference was a weapon she had no defense against. She wanted a fight, tears, humiliation. I gave her nothing. Let's go to my office, Miss Kovac, Mr. Chin said firmly, guiding me away from the scene. As we walked, I heard a sharp cry and a thud behind me. I didn't turn. Later, I learned that in her rage, shaking and unsteady, Elara had slipped in the puddle of wine she herself had spilled. She fell hard on the marble floor. The ambulance came. The baby, the Jiao heir, was lost. Mr. Jiao, when he arrived at the hospital, took one look at her, heard the news and said, "You lost it? Then don't bother calling me again." He walked out and out of her life. I knew none of this as I sat in Mr. Chen's office, the ruined jacket draped over a chair. I showed him my quality reports, my contracts with the vineyard. He examined a strawberry, bit into it, his eyes closing for a moment. The flavor is exceptional, he conceded. We talked for an hour about supply chains, seasonal availability, organic certification. In the end, we signed a 1-year trial contract. It was my greatest victory. As I drove home in my stained shirt, the signed paper on the passenger seat felt lighter than air. I had climbed a mountain Elara couldn't even see the summit of. When I returned to Oakvale, the news of Elara's miscarriage and abandonment had already arrived, carried by the village gossip wire. There was a subdued, almost superstitious awe in the way people looked at me now. I had gone to the city, faced down my sister's drama, and returned with the prize. I was no longer just lucky or hardworking. I was formidable. Katerina took my stained jacket without a word, and the next morning, it was on my bed, cleaned and pressed, the faintest shadow of the stain remaining like a ghostly badge of honor. "The city is full of spills," was all she said. I ran my fingers over the faint mark. It wasn't a ruin. It was a record. A testament that some stains could be endured, and that what you built was always stronger than what others tried to break. The greenhouses were thriving. The money was flowing. But I looked at the women of Oakvale, the ones bent over laundry, the ones gossiping at the well with empty hands, the ones with sharp minds withering in idleness, and I saw another field lying fallow. My business could grow, but my world could grow wider. It was time to plant a different kind of seed. The contract with the Imperial Garden was a key that unlocked a new scale of thinking. My little greenhouse operation was no longer just a family venture. It was a bona fide business with a prestigious client. The steady income allowed me to breathe, to plan beyond the next season. But as I walked through Oakvale, the contrast gnawed at me. There was the vibrant, productive world of my greenhouses, where Miro and I and our hired hands moved with purpose. And then there was the rest of the village. Beautiful, nestled in its valley with a river curling beside it, yet somehow asleep. The men farmed or worked in the distant lumber mill. The women, they tended small plots, raised children, and gathered at the well, their conversations a looping tape of domestic grievances and village scandals. Their potential, like the rich soil beneath their feet, was untilled. I remembered the art students who'd sometimes come to sketch the old bridge. I remembered the families from the county who'd drive out on weekends for a picnic by the river, complaining there was nowhere to stay. The idea, once a vague notion, crystallized. Ecotourism. We wouldn't just sell food, we'd sell an experience. The beauty of Oakvale itself would become the product. I started with the empty houses. Several families had left for city work, leaving their ancestral homes locked and decaying. I tracked down the owners, mostly elderly uncles or distant cousins in the city. My pitch was simple. I would pay a modest, steady rent, cover all maintenance and taxes, and transform their empty burden into a source of income. For wary villagers, it was money for nothing. I signed leases on 5 cottages. Then I called a meeting of the village women. Not at the town hall, but in my largest greenhouse, among the fragrant strawberry rows. About 20 came, curious and skeptical, their arms crossed over aprons. I have 5 houses to prepare for guests, I began, dispensing with pleasantries. City people who will pay to sleep here, to eat here, to breathe our air. I need them cleaned from rafters to root cellars. I need linens sewn and mended. I need gardens weeded and planted with flowers, not just cabbages. I need cooks, not just feeders of families. A woman named Daria, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper needlework, spoke up. You want us to be servants for city folk? No, I said, meeting her gaze. I want you to be hosts, to be managers of your own homes. I will pay an hourly wage for the preparation work. And when guests come, you will be paid a share of the profit from their stay. The cleaner the house, the better the cooking, the more you earn. Your skill will set your price. A murmur ran through the group. A wage was one thing. A share of profits was something entirely new. It meant their effort had a direct, measurable value. What do we know about city people? Another asked, nervous. You know how to make a home welcoming, I said. You know which herbs make chicken taste like a celebration. You know where the best blackberries grow. That is what they will pay for. Your knowledge. Not your servitude. I hired Daria on the spot to oversee the sewing team. I hired Magda, whose pickles were the envy of the valley, to plan simple, seasonal menus. I hired young Lena, who was restless and clever, to learn bookkeeping with me. We called the enterprise Havenstead. The transformation was slow, then sudden. The women, initially self-conscious, discovered a fierce pride in their work. This wasn't thankless chores, it was craftsmanship. They argued over the perfect shade of blue for curtains, experimented with recipes using my greenhouse produce, scoured the woods for wildflowers for the tables. The first guests were a hesitant couple from the county, a photographer and his wife. They stayed in Riverwatch Cottage, tended by Magda and her daughter. They came for a weekend and stayed for 3 days, mesmerized by the silence, the food, the guided forage Magda led them on. They left a glowing review in the county paper and booked for next season. Word spread. School groups came for nature retreats. Art students returned, now with a place to stay. A new kind of chatter filled the well. Not just gossip but strategies. My guests loved the lavender sachets. I'm planting more. Do you think city people would like a lesson in cheese making? The money, once a trickle into a few households, became a steady stream into many. I formalized it with profit-sharing contracts. We held monthly meetings in the greenhouse, my boardroom, to review guest comments, award small bonuses for excellence and plan improvements. The women who had once been defined by whose wife or mother they were now had titles: hospitality manager, culinary director, groundskeeper. The village changed. The idle chatter turned to enterprise. The neglected cottages bloomed with painted shutters and flower boxes. The path to the river was cleared and signposted. Oakvale was waking up, and its pulse was the industrious hum of its women. Of course, not everyone was pleased. My father and Anya watched this renaissance from the crumbling edges of their life. Ilara, broken by her loss and abandonment, had been dragged back to their shack. She was a ghost of her former self, vacant-eyed, muttering about pigs and palaces. I heard she sometimes crawled into the old pigsty, now empty, and lay there. My stepmother, ever pragmatic, had renamed her Kira, as if a new name could erase the shame. Their jealousy festered, but they were powerless. The law had sided with me. The village's respect, once a nebulous thing, was now firmly anchored to my success. They were pariahs tied to a tragedy of their own making. Then one afternoon they appeared at the gate of the Kovac house. They came bearing the weapon they thought could still wound me, the past. Anya held a cloth bundle. She looked older, worn thin by bitterness. My father hovered behind her, shoulders slumped. Alina. My dear girl. Anya's voice was a grotesque pantomime of maternal concern. She rushed forward as if to hug me, but I took a step back, my posture a clear wall. She stopped, her smile straining. Look at you, so thin from all your work. I brought you your favorite. She unfolded the cloth to reveal a stack of rough, yellow corn cakes. A memory ambushed me. A hungry child, slapped for reaching for a sliver of meat, cheeks burning, stomach cramping, finding solace in the dry, crumbly blandness of a corn cake dipped in water. It wasn't love. It was the food of deprivation. I stared at the cakes, then called for our yard dog, a cheerful mutt named Bori. I took a cake, broke it, and tossed the pieces to the ground. Bori sniffed, then wagged his tail and ate them happily. Anya's face darkened into a mask of pure hatred. The performance cracked. My father stepped in, his voice a whine. Alina, you are my flesh and blood. I'm getting old. I have no son to care for me, to honor my memory. You have a duty. The absurdity of it broke something loose in me. A laugh, short and harsh, escaped my lips. Flesh and blood? You ignored that flesh and blood for a decade. You have no son because your obsession for one killed my mother. And I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of 2 lifetimes, am not your heir. I have my own legacy to build. It does not include you. Before they could spew more venom, Katerina materialized from the house, a broom in her hands like a warrior's spear. Out, she roared, her voice scattering chickens. Out of my sight. You bring the stench of failure to my door. Go. They retreated, but not far. They sat down right outside our gate on the public path and began to wail, a loud, theatrical lament about ungrateful children and cruel fate. It was their last desperate performance for an audience. I checked the clock. It was time. I had an appointment. Ignoring their cries, I turned and walked calmly toward their shack. Confused, thinking I'd relented, they scrambled to their feet and followed me, a pathetic, hopeful procession. As we neared the dilapidated house, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows pulled up, parking precisely where the tattooed boy's sedan once had. 2 men in expensive suits stepped out, clutching leather portfolios. My stepmother's eyes lit up with a mad, avaricious gleam. Kira, she shrieked toward the house. Kira, come out. Your sister is here. She's brought her rich friends. We're saved. The door creaked open. Alara, Kira, stood there, pale and hollowed out. She saw the shiny car, the men in suits, and then her eyes landed on me. A terrifying comprehension dawned in her sunken eyes. This wasn't rescue. The men approached me. Ms. Kovac? We're from the Regional Development Office. We've come to finalize the survey for the Welcome Arch. Of course, I said, shaking their hands. This is the proposed site. The truth, so much more brutal than any insult, slammed into my birth family. I hadn't come for them. I had come for their land. Their home. The last vestige of their existence in Oakvale was to be demolished to make way for the symbol of the new village. A village I had built. Alara's sanity, already threadbare, snapped. A guttural sound ripped from her throat. "No," she screamed, lunging at me, her fingers hooked into claws. "It's not possible. It should be me. Why is it always you? Why do you get everything?" The investor stepped between us, holding her back easily. She thrashed like a trapped animal, her hair wild, spittle flying. "It should have been mine. That life. That car. Those men. Mine." I looked at her, this broken reflection of my own second chance. The pity I felt was immense and cold. She had been given the same blank page. She could have chosen knowledge, self-reliance, dignity. Instead, she had chosen shortcuts, jealousy, and the hollow validation of men like Luca and Mr. Jiao. "Let me tell you why, Alara," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the sudden stillness. "It's because I never waited for a carriage. I walked. I walked through snow on a broken bicycle. I walked through humiliation and hunger. You spent your life waiting for someone to carry you. And no one ever wants to carry dead weight for long." She crumpled to the dirt, sobbing, not in grief, but in a final, furious understanding of her own emptiness. The investors concluded their survey. The compensation for the land, they explained, would be fair market value. That value, I informed my stricken father and stepmother, would be used to settle the outstanding court judgment for the destroyed greenhouse. There would be no windfall. Only a final settling of accounts. They had 1 week to leave. As I walked back to my home, my real home, I didn't look back. The ghosts of my first life were finally being exorcised, not by violence or vengeance, but by the relentless forward-moving force of a life well built. The arch that would replace their shack would not be a monument to my triumph over them, but a gateway to the future I was creating. For myself, for Moreau, for Katerina, and for every woman in Oakvale who had chosen to build something with her own 2 hands. The week my birth family had to vacate their shack passed in a tense, surreal quiet for the rest of Oakvale. For me, it was a period of intense forward-focused activity. The arrival of the regional development officials had been the final catalyst. Our village wasn't just a successful agritourism experiment anymore. It was being formally recognized as a model village for sustainable rural development. The grant attached to the title was substantial, and with it came a mandate to create a visible, welcoming entrance that reflected our new identity. Their house was the obvious sight. It stood at the eastern approach to the village, a sagging monument to neglect. Its demolition would be symbolic, practical, and legally satisfying. I avoided that side of the village. My life was consumed with the logistics of growth. Havenstead was fully booked through the next season. We'd had to establish a waiting list. The demand necessitated expansion, but I was determined to grow sustainably, without ruining the rustic charm people paid for. I leased 3 more empty houses, putting more women to work. Lena, my quick-witted bookkeeper, was now managing the reservations system, her eyes shining with a purpose she'd never found in school. Moreau and I had expanded the greenhouses again, this time experimenting with exotic mushrooms and bitter greens favored by the Imperial Gardens chef. Our partnership had settled into a comfortable, wordless rhythm. He spoke to the plants, I spoke to the markets. In the evenings we'd sit on the porch of our home. It had taken a year to stop thinking of it as the Kovac house, reviewing the day. His quiet steadfastness was the bedrock upon which all my frantic building rested. Sometimes he'd reach over and take my hand, his calloused thumbs smoothing over my knuckles. It was a simple gesture, but in it was a world of unspoken understanding. Katerina, the self-appointed bank and chief quality control officer, had become my most ruthless and valuable advisor. She had an uncanny sense for people who would try to take advantage and a nose for financial discrepancies sharper than any accountant's. She also, I discovered, had a hidden talent for landscape design. The plans for the archway and the surrounding garden were largely hers, sketched on graph paper with a precise, fierce hand. The morning of the demolition I stayed at the farm. There was no need for me to witness it. The past was being torn down by a yellow excavator, not by my own hands. Its death rattle, the crunch of rotting timber, the crash of clay tiles, carried faintly on the breeze. I was in greenhouse 3, checking the pH of the mushroom substrate, when Lena came running in, her face flushed. "They're gone," she said, breathless. "The Vesselins. They left before dawn. And Alara is not with them." I straightened up, wiping my hands on a cloth. "What do you mean?" "Magda's cousin lives on the West Road. She saw Gregor and Anya walking out with 2 big sacks heading toward the bus route. Alara wasn't with them. Magda went to look. The house was empty, but Alara's things were still there, scattered." A cold knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't concern. It was the grim closure of a prophecy. "Leave it," I said. "It's not our affair." But the village, of course, made it their affair. By noon, the story had woven itself from whispers. My father and stepmother, in their frantic, shame-filled retreat, had argued violently. Alara, lost in her madness, had been a burden. She ate too much, she wailed at night, she refused to walk. In the end, in the darkness somewhere on the lonely road to the county, they had abandoned her. Just left her by the side of the path and kept walking. No one knew what became of her. Some said a truck driver took pity. Others whispered of darker ends in the woods. I didn't ask. I didn't send anyone to look. The sister I had known had died in the mountain stream a lifetime ago. The broken creature left behind was a stranger whose tragedy was of her own making. A week later, where the shack had been, a beautiful rustic stone archway stood. It was crafted from local granite, with an ironwork sign swinging from its center that read, "Oakvale Haven," in elegant script. Beneath it, Katerina's garden burst with hardy, fragrant blooms. It was a gateway, not a barricade. It spoke of welcome, not of exclusion. The official inauguration was a village festival. The government officials came, including Stefan. He made a formal speech about innovation and community. But the real celebration was afterwards. The women of Havenstead laid out a feast on long tables in the square, all food from our land, prepared with their newfound culinary pride. There was music, and for the first time I saw Katerina smile, a real, unguarded smile as she watched villagers and tourists mingling under strings of lanterns. As dusk painted the sky in violet and gold, I slipped away. I walked past the new arch, up the winding path to the highest hill that overlooked Oakvale. From here I could see it all. The glittering greenhouses like jewels, the cottages with their warm lit windows dotting the valley, the river a silver ribbon under the emerging moon. The place of my poverty and pain had become a tapestry of prosperity and peace. I reached under my blouse and pulled out my mother's locket. I hadn't opened it in years. My fingers, now sure and strong, found the tiny clasp. It opened with a soft click. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, faded photograph of my mother's face, smiling gently. On the other, a slip of paper with a single word in her delicate handwriting: persevere. Tears, not of sadness but of a profound, aching completion, welled in my eyes. You see, Mama? I whispered to the wind, to the stars, to her memory. I did. I am. I wasn't just living. I was thriving. And the life I had built was not a lonely fortress, but a thriving ecosystem that sustained others. The ultimate revenge on a world that had offered me so little was not to hoard my success, but to multiply it. Success, I learned, is not a destination but a climate. It creates its own weather. With the model village designation, a gentle, steady rain of opportunities began to fall on Oakvale. A small agricultural college started sending interns to study our integrated greenhouse system. A regional cooking magazine did a feature on the secret kitchens of Oakvale, turning Magda and her team into local celebrities. The steady stream of guests demanded more amenities, so we built a simple, beautiful community hall from reclaimed barn wood, used for weddings, meetings, and weekly markets where the women could sell their crafts and preserves. My role evolved from manager to facilitator, then to something like a visionary. I spent less time with soil under my nails and more time at a desk, but the desk was in a sunlit office above the community hall, its windows looking out over the valley I had helped reshape. It was there one crisp autumn morning that Lena came in, her expression a comic mix of gravity and glee. The village council is here to see you. The council, traditionally a group of older men, had been quietly sidelined by the sheer economic force of Havenstead. They entered, looking uncomfortable in their formal jackets. Their spokesman, old Mr. Petrov, cleared his throat. Alina Kovac, he began, using my married name with deliberate respect. The village is at a crossroads. The old ways of leading, they are not suited for this new world you have brought us. The people, they speak of you. They trust you. We are here to ask you to stand for village head in the next election. The offer hung in the air. Village head. The position Lazar Kovac had held, the source of the original power that had drawn my family into its orbit. It was the ultimate symbol of traditional authority in Oakvale. I looked at their expectant faces. I thought of the endless meetings, the petty disputes over property lines, the compromises of politics, the slow grind of bureaucracy. It would consume the energy I used to create. Thank you, I said, my voice calm and firm. It is a great honor. But I must decline. Their shock was palpable. Refusing power was in concept foreign to them. My work is here, I explained, gesturing to the plans on my desk. Sketches for a cooperative dairy, a literacy program for older women. My talent is building things, not administering them. But I have a nomination. I proposed 2 names. Lena, whose sharp mind and fairness everyone respected, and Tomas, a young man who had returned from the city with an engineering degree and a passion for green technology. They understand the new Oakvale. They are its future. I will support them fully. It was a quiet revolution. By refusing the crown, I dismantled the old hierarchy more completely than any election could. The council, bewildered, agreed to meet the candidates. The rumor that I was pregnant started soon after. I suppose it was the natural next chapter the village expected for a successful married woman. I'd put on a little weight, comfortable weight from regular meals and contentment. I was often seen jogging in the mornings along the ridge path, something no village woman did, fueling the speculation. That's how city women stay strong for childbirth, they'd nod sagely. I let them talk. Moreau and I had never discussed children. Our life was so full, our partnership so complete in its current form, that it hadn't felt like a missing piece. The future was a landscape we were exploring together, and it was vast and exciting enough. The true culmination came not with a birth, but with a birthright. The regional government, impressed by our self-sustaining model, offered a permanent low-interest loan to establish a formal Oakvale Development Trust. It would be a fund to finance future village projects, owned and managed collectively by the stakeholders: the women of Havenstead, the farmers in our supply cooperative, the craftsmen. The signing ceremony was held in the community hall. As I prepared to sign the founding documents as the trust's first director, I looked around the room. There was Magda standing tall in a new dress, her pickle recipe now a branded product. There was Daria, who had just hired her own apprentice. There was Miro, his proud, quiet smile meant only for me. There was Katerina, sitting regally in the front row, her eyes suspiciously bright. This was my legacy. Not a child, but 100 children. A system that would outlive me. A village that had learned its own strength. The money from the trust would build the dairy, fund the literacy program, provide scholarships for village kids. The cycle of poverty and dependence that had trapped my mother, that had defined my first life, was broken here. Permanently. After the signing, as people mingled over glasses of local berry wine, Katerina approached me. She didn't say anything. She simply took my hand and pressed into my palm a small, cold, heavy object. Then she walked away. I looked down. It was a key. An old, ornate iron key. I knew what it opened. The locked cabinet. The bank. Later that night, after the last guest had left, I went to the cabinet. The key turned smoothly. Inside, I expected to see neat bundles of cash, the financial ledger. Instead, I found two things. On top was a simple folder. I opened it. It was a legal document, drawn up by a county lawyer months ago. It transferred the deed of the Kovac house and a substantial portion of the family's land holdings into my name and mine alone. Not Miro's. The reason stated, in recognition of singular contribution to family and community prosperity. Beneath the folder was a small velvet jewelry box. I opened it. Inside lay a pair of exquisite pearl earrings, the kind I'd only seen in pictures. And a note in Katerina's decisive script, for my daughter. Wear them when you meet the governor next month. Do not shame me by looking poor. I sat on the floor, the documents in one hand, the pearls in the other, and finally let the tears come. They were not tears of the hungry, beaten girl. They were the tears of a woman who had arrived fully and completely at a home she had built with her own hands, and had been given the keys to the kingdom as a simple matter of fact. I was no longer Alina Veselin, the discarded daughter. I was Alina Kovac, the architect of Havenstead. And this deep-rooted, earned belonging was worth more than any revenge. Peace, I discovered, was not the absence of noise but a certain quality of sound. It was the hum of the greenhouse fans, the distant laughter from a cottage porch, the scratch of Lena's pen in the ledger, the steady rhythmic sound of Moreau sharpening tools in the evening. It was a symphony of a life in purposeful motion. With the trust established and Lena and Tomas elected as the new young leadership of Oakvale, a subtle shift occurred. I stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Havenstead. Magda became the general manager, her natural authority and culinary genius perfect for the role. Daria took over all textiles and design. My job was now strategic, securing larger partnerships, liaising with the regional development office and mentoring the next wave of ideas. The rumor about my pregnancy eventually died, replaced by a new, more accurate understanding. Alina Kovac was not a mother of children. She was a mother of projects, of possibilities. Young couples came to me for business advice, not just wedding loans. My office became a quiet place of planning, where the future of Oakvale was charted on whiteboards and spreadsheets. One afternoon I was reviewing plans for the cooperative dairy, a project that would utilize pastureland that had lain fallow for years, when a familiar, though long absent, car pulled up outside. It was Stefan, the district director. He was alone. "Come to check on your investment, cousin?" I asked, welcoming him into my office with tea. Something like that, he said, accepting the cup. He looked older, more seasoned, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Mostly I came to see the phenomenon for myself. You've created a textbook case here, Alina. They're talking about the Oakvale model in provincial meetings. It wasn't just me, I said automatically, the truth of the statement deeper than modesty. Of course. But you were the catalyst. The spark. He sipped his tea. There's talk of a regional award. For rural innovation. Your name is on the nomination. An award. External validation. It felt strange, like being praised for breathing. That's kind, I said, but the real reward is outside the window. He followed my gaze to where two little girls, the daughters of one of our cheesemakers, were selling wildflower bouquets from a stand they'd built themselves. I see. He was quiet for a moment. And your sister? Any word? The question didn't shock me. Stefan dealt in facts, in closure. No, I said. And I do not seek any. Some stories don't have an ending. They just stop. He nodded, understanding. My aunt, she is well? She seems. He searched for the word. Happy, I supplied. She's happy. She's painting the shutters on the archway garden blue this week. Claims the first color was insipid. A genuine smile touched his lips. She always did have an eye. He finished his tea and stood. The award ceremony is in 3 months in the provincial capital. Consider it. It could bring more attention, more funding. After he left, I did consider it. Not for the glory, but for the potential leverage. A platform could be useful. That evening I discussed it with Moreau. We were walking the perimeter of the newest greenhouse, the one dedicated to medicinal herbs, a new experiment. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and sage. Will you go? He asked, his hand finding mine in the twilight. Will you come with me? He squeezed my hand. Where you go I follow. Even if it's to a room full of suits. He said it without resentment, a simple statement of fact. Our partnership was our compass. Katerina, when told, merely sniffed. An award? Good. They are finally recognizing quality. You will need a new dress. Not that blue sack you wear to the county. Something with structure. She was already mentally shopping. The months passed in the rich, busy blur of a thriving harvest. The dairy project broke ground. The literacy program for the older women began, and the sight of Magda, her face fierce with concentration, sounding out syllables with Daria, was more moving to me than any official ceremony. The day before we were to leave for the capital, I took one last walk alone. I went to the hilltop, my hilltop. The view never ceased to unlock something in my chest. Oakvale spread below, no longer just a village, but a living, breathing organism of green and stone and light. The archway stood as a sentinel. The river flashed silver. Smoke curled from chimneys. I held my mother's locket warm from my skin. Persevere. I did. Every single day. But it was more than that now. It wasn't just about enduring. It was about flourishing. It was about taking the hard, rocky soil of a cursed life and not just clinging to it, but composting it, enriching it until it could support an entire ecosystem. I thought of Alara, a ghost on the road. I felt no hatred, only a distant, profound sadness. Her tragedy was that she saw life as a finite pie, and my slice was always theft from her plate. She never understood that the real magic was in learning to bake your own bigger pie and then teaching others the recipe. The awards ceremony was everything I expected. Cavernous hall, glittering chandeliers, speeches laden with jargon. I wore the pearl earrings. Katerina had indeed procured a dress, a deep emerald green, simple but impeccably cut. I felt like an imposter for all of 10 minutes. Then, as I sat on the stage after receiving the plaque, they called it the Pioneer of Sustainable Futures Award. Listening to the next honoree, I looked out at the audience. I saw Moreau sitting straight and proud, clapping with such earnest force it made me want to laugh and cry. I saw Katerina, her chin high, looking for all the world like she owned the auditorium. And I realized I wasn't an imposter. I had earned my place in this room not by birth or connection, but by the sheer, undeniable weight of things built, lives changed, soil made fertile. We returned to Oakvale as minor celebrities. The provincial paper ran a story. For a few weeks, we had a new surge of curious tourists. But soon the rhythm reasserted itself. The attention was a brief summer rain, The deep, constant work was the aquifer that sustained us. Years flowed, marked not by calendars but by accomplishments. The dairy produced its first award-winning cheese. Lena and Tomas got married, their wedding the biggest celebration the new community hall had seen. Katerina, to everyone's shock, began a late-life romance with the widowed county librarian, a gentle man who adored her fierceness. One spring morning I found Miro in the original greenhouse, the one Alara had destroyed a lifetime ago. It was now our heritage plot, growing heirloom vegetables. He was on his knees, carefully tying up tomato vines. The sunlight through the plastic fell on his hair, which was now threaded with silver. I sat on the wooden edge of a planting bed watching him work. The silence between us was the comfortable, full silence of shared history. "Are you happy?" The question came out softly, surprising even me. He stopped, sat back on his heels and looked at me. Dirt smudged his cheek. His eyes, those kind, earnest eyes, held mine. "Alina," he said, his voice the same steady rumble. "I have watched you turn despair into a harvest. I have seen you build a world where our neighbors walk taller. I get to work this land with you every day. My mother laughs more than she ever has." He reached out, his soil-stained hand covering mine. "I have a life I never dared dream of. What do you think?" I leaned forward and kissed him, tasting of earth and sun and promise. Later that day, a courier arrived with a formal-looking envelope. It was from a historical society. They were doing a project on women who shaped the region, and requested an interview, a biography. They wanted my story. I held the letter, feeling the weight of it. My story. The hungry girl. The reborn bride. The greenhouse builder. The village architect. I went to my desk and took out a fresh notebook. On the first page I wrote a single sentence, the only one I knew for certain would be the beginning. "It is not the family you are born into that defines you, but the family you build and the soil you choose to tend. The rest I would figure out as I went. Just like I always had." The end.